I secretly bought a house no one knew about. Before I could even step inside, my neighbor called and said strangers were partying in it. When I opened the security feed, my stomach dropped. It was my own siblings' family acting like they owned the place. I didn't argue or rush over. I made one call, and that choice set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Before I tell you how that single call turned my quiet dream into an open confrontation, do me a small favor, take a moment to support this channel and drop a comment saying where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. My name is Rowan Hale. I was 30 when I finally did the one thing no one in my family thought I was capable of doing. I bought my own home. Not just any home, but the kind of place I used to picture on nights when sleep wouldn't come. A house near the water, tucked away from noise, with tall windows and clean white walls that caught the morning light. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not even friends. I learned a long time ago that anything I built in the open was treated like shared property, something that could be claimed, corrected, or quietly taken. I worked for that house in ways that still make my body ache when I think about them. Extra shifts. Freelance work after midnight. Skipped vacations. Meals that came from packets because they were cheap and quick. While others my age posted photos of dinners out and weekend trips, I was tracking every dollar, every transfer, every small sacrifice that brought me closer to a down payment I never thought I'd reach. More than once, I almost quit. More than once, I heard my parents' voices in my head telling me I was chasing something unrealistic, that I should follow my brother Victor's example instead of trying to prove something on my own. Victor had always been the example. The one who did things right. The one my parents talked about with pride in their voices. When we were kids, if something went missing, it somehow ended up with him, and I was told to stop being dramatic. If one of my ideas suddenly became his plan, it was brushed off as teamwork. As adults, it didn't change. When I talked about saving for a house, my mother laughed softly and said I should focus on stability instead of dreams. My father reminded me that Victor understood responsibility, that I should learn from him. So I learned something else instead. I learned to stay quiet. The day I closed on the house, I didn't celebrate. I sat alone in my car outside the bank, the folder with my name on it resting on the passenger seat. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd done. That folder wasn't just paperwork. It was years of being underestimated, years of proving something only to myself. I drove straight to the lake, parked across from the tall black gate of the Silver Pine Lake House, and just stared at it. The place looked unreal, stone walls, ivy starting to climb, water shimmering just beyond the trees. It didn't feel like something that could belong to someone like me. I didn't go in that day. I went home instead, afraid that if I crossed the threshold too soon, something would happen to take it away. 2 days later, I returned with the keys in my pocket and a knot in my chest I couldn't explain. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and for a moment, I let myself imagine mornings on the porch, quiet evenings without anyone questioning how I lived. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the gate. That was when my phone rang. It was Thomas Reed, the neighbor whose house sat across the narrow road that curved along the lake. We'd exchanged numbers during the inspection, just in case. I almost ignored the call, thinking it was about property lines or noise rules. When I answered, his voice was tight. "Rowan," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but there are people inside your house." I stopped walking. The world seemed to tilt. "What do you mean, people?" I asked. "They've been there for a while," he said. "Music, kids running around, balloons. Looks like some kind of celebration." My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood there staring at the gate like it was suddenly unfamiliar. Slowly, I pulled out my phone and opened the security app the realtor had insisted I install. The screen lit up, and everything inside me went cold. There was my living room, my untouched living room, decorated with bright balloons tied to chairs I hadn't even sat on yet. There were wine glasses on the counter, plates scattered across the island. Laughter echoed through the microphone, sharp and careless. And standing in the center of it all was Victor, my brother, holding up a glass like he was toasting his own success. His wife Marissa leaned against the counter, relaxed, confident, like she belonged there. Their kids ran up and down the stairs, shouting, leaving marks on floors I hadn't walked across once. They weren't visiting. They were claiming it. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. All the years of swallowing things, of being told to let it go, of watching Victor step into spaces I was pushed out of, came rushing back. I realized then that if I didn't stop this now, it wouldn't end with one night. This house would become another thing I shared, another achievement rewritten as his. I didn't drive over. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront them. I made one call. I told the dispatcher my name, my address, and the simple truth: people were inside my property without permission. When asked if I knew them, I said yes. And I meant it in a way that made my chest ache. I sat in my car across the road and watched the live feed as flashing lights painted my driveway in red and blue. Inside the house, chaos replaced laughter. Marissa rushed to gather glasses. The kids were herded upstairs. Victor adjusted his shirt and walked to the door wearing the same smile he'd used his entire life to talk his way out of consequences. This time, I was done letting that smile decide my future. The flashing lights reflected off the lake like broken streaks of color, rippling with every movement of the water. I stayed in my car, hands locked around the steering wheel, watching everything unfold through the small glowing screen in my palm. Inside the house, Victor opened the door with that same practiced confidence, greeting the officers as if he were welcoming guests he'd personally invited. Even through muted audio, I could recognize his tone, smooth, friendly, just amused enough to suggest that the situation was silly and easily explained. One officer stepped forward, asking calm, measured questions. Victor gestured behind him, motioning broadly at the walls, the staircase, the kitchen. He spoke like someone giving a tour. I could almost hear him saying it was family property, that there had been some mix-up, that everything was fine. Marissa hovered just behind him, her smile tight, her eyes darting around as if she could rearrange reality by sheer force of will. The children were suddenly nowhere to be seen. Then one of the officers asked for proof. Victor's posture shifted. Not much, just a fraction, but I knew him well enough to see it. His shoulders stiffened. He leaned against the doorframe, buying time. He talked. He always talked. When the truth was inconvenient. I watched his hands move, animated, confident, selling a version of events he'd probably rehearsed the moment the lights appeared. I opened my car door and stepped out into the cold night air. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last, like I was walking into a version of my life I'd avoided for years. The driveway gravel crunched under my shoes, sharp and loud. One of the officers noticed me first and turned slightly. Victor followed his gaze. The smile slid off his face. "Rowan," he said, surprise flickering into irritation and then quickly masked again. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. I nodded to the officers and handed over the folder I'd brought with me, the one I'd started carrying everywhere the moment the keys were in my hand. Inside were copies of the deed, the mortgage approval, bank statements, everything with my name stamped cleanly and undeniably across it. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. The officer flipped through the papers slowly, methodically. Victor's voice rose, just a little. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I helped with this place. He wouldn't even be able to afford it without me." There it was. The lie, delivered smoothly, like it had always been part of the story. I felt something old stir in my chest. A memory of standing in our childhood kitchen, being told I misunderstood things. Of being corrected when I spoke up. Of watching my parents' eyes turn toward Victor automatically, trusting him before I finished a sentence. For a brief moment, I almost expected the officer to look at me the same way. He didn't. He finished reading, closed the folder, and handed it back to me. "Sir," he said to Victor, "unless you can provide documentation showing ownership or tenancy, you and your family will need to leave the property." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Marissa stepped forward, her voice strained. "This is a family matter. We can sort this out ourselves." The officer shook his head. "Not tonight." Victor's jaw tightened. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for the hesitation he'd relied on my entire life. I gave him none. "Do you want them removed?" the officer asked me. I didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word felt solid, final. Like a door closing. Victor's face flushed. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "After everything, you're really doing this?" I met his gaze, steady. "After everything, I am." The officers moved then, firm but controlled, guiding Victor and Marissa back into the house so they could gather their things. I watched as they disappeared down the hallway, their earlier confidence completely gone. A few minutes later, they emerged with coats half-zipped, children bundled hastily, expressions tight with humiliation and anger. The kids looked confused, clinging to Marissa's hands. That twisted something in me, but not enough to undo what had already been set in motion. They were escorted to their car. Victor didn't look at me again. Marissa did, once, her eyes burning with something sharp and accusing, as if I had done this to them rather than simply refusing to disappear. Their car pulled away, taillights shrinking into the dark. The house went quiet. Not the awkward silence of an argument paused, but a deep, absolute stillness. The kind that settles after something irreversible has happened. I stood there for a long moment after the officers left, listening to the lake, the wind moving through the trees, the faint hum of the security system resetting itself. Then my phone started vibrating. I didn't answer it that night. I didn't need to see the names lighting up the screen to know who was calling. I went inside instead, finally crossing the threshold of the house alone. The smell of wine lingered in the air. There were scuff marks on the floor, fingerprints on the counter, a balloon deflated and rolling slowly across the living room like evidence of a crime scene no one wanted to acknowledge. I walked through each room, not fixing anything, not cleaning yet. Just seeing. Letting the reality settle in. This was still mine. Sleep didn't come easily. My phone buzzed intermittently until I finally turned it off. When morning light spilled through the windows, pale and quiet, I felt wrung out but steady. That steadiness didn't last long. By the time I got to work, my voicemail was full. My mother's message was first. Her voice was tight, controlled, already halfway to accusation. My father followed, his tone colder, heavier with disappointment than concern. Then there were messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all variations of the same theme: confusion, shock, gentle reminders about family, about loyalty, about not embarrassing people in public. Victor didn't leave a message. I listened to the last voicemail just as my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "What have you done?" my mother demanded without greeting. "I protected my home," I said. "You humiliated your brother," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" The familiar pattern unfolded effortlessly. Not why he was there. Not why he lied. Just how my response affected everyone else. "It was my house," I said again, slower this time. "He had no right to be there." My father's voice came on the line, low and stern. "That house should have been for family. You didn't have to involve authorities." Family. The word felt hollow. I ended the call before they could say more. My hands were shaking, but underneath that was something else: resolve. I knew Victor wouldn't stop. This wasn't over. He'd never accepted a boundary he didn't set himself. I was right. By lunchtime, a coworker leaned into my office, phone in hand, eyes uncertain. "Hey, I don't know if you've seen this." She showed me the screen. Victor's face stared back at me, framed carefully in soft light, his arm around Marissa, their children close. The caption painted him as generous, misunderstood. It talked about sacrifice. About betrayal. About how some people forgot where they came from once they had something of their own. The comments were already piling up. Family always comes first. Money changes people. I can't believe someone would do that to their own brother. And then I saw my parents' names among them. Something inside me went very still. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about who controlled the story, and who got erased if they didn't fight back. I closed the app, opened my email, and started organizing every document, every screenshot, every piece of footage I had. If Victor wanted a public version of events, I would make sure the truth was ready to stand on its own. Because I knew him well enough to understand one thing clearly now. He wasn't done. And neither was I. The post spread faster than I expected. By the time I got home that evening, my phone was hot in my hand from constant notifications. Messages stacked on top of one another, some angry, some disappointed, some dripping with forced sympathy. People who hadn't checked on me in years suddenly had strong opinions about my character. I read a few, then stopped. I knew better than to drown in it. Victor had always been good at rallying a crowd. He didn't need facts, only emotion, and he knew exactly which strings to pull. Inside the house, the quiet felt different now. Not peaceful, alert. Like the walls themselves were waiting. I dropped my bag on the counter and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the faint ring left by a wine glass I hadn't placed there. It was ridiculous how something so small could feel like an insult. I wiped it away slowly, deliberately, as if erasing more than just a mark. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed the past over and over, searching for the moment where I could have changed the outcome. But every memory led to the same conclusion: Victor didn't take because I allowed him once or twice. He took because he was taught that he could. The next morning, my parents showed up unannounced. I saw their car from the window before they even knocked, parked neatly at the edge of the driveway like they were visiting a stranger's home. I didn't open the door right away. I watched them through the glass, my mother smoothing her coat, my father standing rigid, jaw set. They looked rehearsed. When I finally opened the door, I kept my body in the frame. "We need to talk," my mother said, already stepping forward. "About what?" I asked. She glanced past me, into the house, her eyes moving over the open space with something like appraisal. "About fixing this." My father cleared his throat. "This doesn't need to go any further. Victor is upset. People are talking." I let out a short breath. People were talking before I ever bought this place. I just wasn't worth listening to. My mother's lips pressed thin. "That's not fair." "No," I said evenly. "What's not fair is pretending this is new." They exchanged a look. I'd seen it my whole life, the silent agreement to hold the line. My father spoke again. "Victor says you're refusing to compromise." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Compromise on what? Giving him half of something he didn't earn? My mother's voice softened, the way it always did when she wanted something. Rowan, you don't have a family of your own. This house could be a place for everyone. Holidays. Gatherings. A legacy. The word made my chest tighten. A legacy built on lies? My father's expression hardened. You're being dramatic. I stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in. They hesitated, then entered. My mother walked slowly, touching the back of a chair, the counter, the window frame, as if imprinting herself on the space. My father stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed. Victor arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't knock. He walked in like he still belonged there. Glad you could all finally see it in person, he said, glancing around with forced admiration. It really is a nice place. I didn't offer him a seat. He turned to our parents. I told you, didn't I? He's changed. Look at him. I met his gaze. Get to the point. His smile thinned. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, smoothing it carefully on the counter. Simple solution. We split ownership. Keeps things fair. Keeps this out of court. I didn't touch it. My mother looked relieved. That sounds reasonable. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the counter, pressing record. Say that again. Victor stiffened. What are you doing? Protecting myself, I said. You're all welcome to keep talking. My father's eyes narrowed. You don't trust us? I trust patterns, I replied. Victor scoffed. You think recording us makes you powerful? No, I said calmly. It makes me prepared. My mother reached for the phone, then stopped herself. Rowan, please. This is getting ugly. It got ugly when he walked into my house without permission, I said, not raising my voice. Everything after that is just you catching up. Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something settled and clear. I already regret all the times I stayed quiet. I'm done adding to that list. Silence fell heavy between us. My father spoke last. If you go through with this, don't expect support. I nodded. I never really had it. They left shortly after, Victor slamming the door behind him. I locked it and leaned my back against the wood, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the finality of it. Lines had been drawn. There was no pretending otherwise now. The escalation came quickly. Within days, Victor filed a claim, alleging shared ownership and financial contribution. The paperwork arrived neatly, professionally, like another attempt to rewrite reality. I read it once, then twice, then set it down and smiled without humor. He wanted this formal. So did I. I hired a lawyer that afternoon. A woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice who listened without interrupting, flipping through my documents with practiced efficiency. When I showed her the security footage, Victor's toast echoing through the room, she nodded slowly. He didn't think you'd push back, she said. No, I agreed. He never does. The waiting was the worst part. Days stretched into weeks, each one filled with tension. Victor's posts became more aggressive, painting himself as a victim, hinting at betrayal without naming names. My parents stayed quiet publicly but distant privately. Friends chose sides. Some drifted away. A few reached out quietly, apologetic. One evening, I received a message from someone I barely remembered, an old neighbor from our childhood street. She'd seen the posts. She wrote simply, I remember how things really were. Don't let him erase you. I saved it. The hearing date arrived on a gray morning, the sky heavy with clouds. I stood outside the courthouse, folder tucked under my arm, breathing in the cold air until my heartbeat slowed. Inside, Victor sat with his lawyer, polished and confident. Our parents sat behind him, eyes fixed forward. When it was my turn, I stood and told the truth. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just plainly. I presented the documents. The footage. The recording from my kitchen. Victor's lawyer objected. The judge listened. When the ruling came, it was swift. The house was mine. Entirely. Victor's face changed in a way I'd never seen before, not anger, not smugness, but something hollow. My parents didn't look at me as we passed in the hallway. I didn't stop them. Back at the house that evening, I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet. The lake reflected the fading light, calm and indifferent. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the doorframes, grounding myself in what was real. This place had been tested. So had I. And for the first time, I knew something with certainty. No one was taking this from me again. The ruling didn't end things the way I once imagined it would. There was no dramatic collapse, no public apology, no sudden clarity from the people who had doubted me my entire life. What it did instead was strip away the last illusion I had been holding on to, that truth alone could fix what had been broken for years. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Victor didn't look at me. My parents didn't either. They moved past as if I were just another stranger in the hallway, someone whose presence was inconvenient and best ignored. For a moment, that old ache stirred again, the reflex to chase after them, to explain, to soften the outcome so it hurt less for everyone else. I didn't. I stepped outside, inhaled deeply, and kept walking. Back at the Silver Pine Lake house, the quiet greeted me like an old friend. The kind that doesn't ask questions or demand explanations. I locked the door behind me, leaned my forehead against the cool wood, and let the weight finally settle. I hadn't just defended a property. I had severed a role I'd been forced into since childhood. The next few days were strangely calm. Victor went silent online. His posts disappeared one by one, wiped clean as if they'd never existed. A few relatives reached out, cautiously apologetic now that the court had spoken. Their words felt hollow, arriving only when it was safe to be on the right side. My parents called once. I let it go to voicemail. My mother's voice sounded tired, not remorseful. She talked about how everything had gone too far, how families shouldn't end up in court, how people were still whispering. Not once did she say my name with warmth. Not once did she ask how I was holding up. I deleted the message. Weeks passed. I moved into the house properly this time. Furniture arrived. Boxes were unpacked. Each room slowly became mine, not just on paper, but in presence. I cooked meals in the kitchen without feeling like I was trespassing. I sat by the windows at night, watching the lake reflect the moon, feeling something close to peace. One evening, there was a knock at the door. I checked the camera first. It was my parents. They stood side by side on the porch, older somehow, smaller than I remembered. My father's shoulders were slumped. My mother kept wringing her hands together, a nervous habit from years ago. I hesitated longer than I should have, then opened the door just enough to speak. "What do you want?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. "We need to talk." "About what?" I replied. My mother's eyes filled, though I couldn't tell if it was regret or frustration. "About everything." I stepped aside and let them in, not because I owed them access, but because I wanted to hear what they would say now that there was nothing left to take from me. They sat in the living room, glancing around as if seeing the house for the first time, not as something to claim, but as something undeniably out of reach. My father spoke first. "Victor's struggling." I nodded once. "I'm sure he is." My mother leaned forward. We didn't realize how far things had gone. I met her gaze calmly. "You did. You just didn't think I'd stop it." Silence stretched between us. My father sighed. "We thought you were stronger. That you didn't need as much." The words landed exactly where they always had, like justification disguised as praise. Something in me finally let go. "I needed fairness," I said. "Not less." My mother's lips trembled. "We made mistakes." "Yes," I agreed. "You did." They waited, as if expecting forgiveness to follow automatically. It didn't. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "But I'm done explaining myself. I'm done shrinking so other people feel comfortable. This house, this life, it's mine. And I won't apologize for protecting it." My father nodded slowly, like a man finally realizing a door had closed. "We won't interfere again." "I know," I said. "Because now you understand I won't allow it." They left quietly. I didn't feel victorious after they were gone. I felt lighter. That night, I walked through the house turning off lights, pausing in each room. Every space held a memory now, not of conflict, but of choice. I chose to stand firm. I chose to believe myself. I chose to stop letting others rewrite my story. Victor never came back. Months later, I heard through someone else that he'd moved away, chasing another opportunity, another version of success that didn't require accountability. My parents adjusted, slowly, awkwardly, as if learning how to exist without a favored narrative to lean on. As for me, I stayed. I planted trees along the edge of the property. I repainted the room that had bothered me from the start. I invited people who respected boundaries, who asked before entering, who didn't assume ownership over things they hadn't earned. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think back to that first call from the neighbor. The warning. The shock. The moment everything could have gone the way it always had, me stepping aside, swallowing my anger, letting someone else take center stage. Instead, I chose differently. And that choice changed everything. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. If this story resonated with you, support the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is refuse to be erased, and remind each other we're not alone.